Good morning, folks. We're going to get started here. Just as for planning purposes for everyone, I'm going to run through the agenda, then we'll call to order. But we'll have call to order, opening remarks, welcoming, and then we'll have stakeholders presentation, public comment, and then adjournment. We've got a couple special guests in the room. I think they're walking out right now. Representative Corbett and a former Representative Dominic LaRicchia. And I'm going to ask that Dominic come up to the podium and give us our invocations so we can get started here. And you got to be careful asking a former legislator to take the podium.
All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father God, we love you. Thank you for this beautiful day that we've got here, and just give you the praise for that, Lord. Thank you for these legislators and staff that gather here to do the business of this state. Just give them wisdom and discernment, Lord, just to have a conversation that'll be meaningful to the leading the policy of this state, that we can serve the people and better serve you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Dominic. Well, here we are, meeting 404. And we've got a good group of folks here to speak to us today. We're going to try and shut down around 12 o'clock today so everybody can make their travels back. We've got a good many folks on this committee that have traveled a good long way. We want to get them back at a reasonable hour. And the issue that we're considering here is an emotional issue that we have, and a very intricate legal issue that we've heard from many folks across the state. So we recognize that as a committee, and the intent of this committee is to try and find a resolution here where we have conflicts in law and quite frankly conflicts on the banks of our waters in the state of Georgia. In the onset of this committee, I said one thing: we've got scenario happening over and over in the state of Georgia where you have a DNR agent on the banks of a just say nameless creek or river, where a property owner and a hunter or fisherman are having a disagreement as to whether they should be there or shouldn't be there. And that situation in itself is not a situation where that we would like to avoid, where you have 3 people with pistols at minimum standing on the banks of a river in a very heightened state of affairs. So that's what we're after, and that's what we're looking to try and fix, if there is fix. And after hearing all the testimony in each and every one of these committees, we have found that there is not going to be an easy fix. But the duty of this committee is to offer a recommendation based on our study, and the recommendation could be that there's further study. It could be that there is, a solution, or there isn't a solution, or we just need to continue working towards something that will work out for the state of Georgia. I can tell you this flatly: there's no one-size-fits-all fix for this issue. We've got waters in the North Georgia that don't look anything like waters in South Georgia, same in East and West. So we all recognize that, and we're trying to figure out something that is going to be good for all Georgians. I'm going to ask that our committee members introduce themselves, starting with Chairman Vance Smith, and we'll come around the table, and then we'll get right into our stakeholder presentations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Vance Smith. I represent District 138, which is part of Muskogee, part of Harris County, and part of Troup County. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks to those of you in the audience who've made the effort to come today. That's really important to us. I'm Lynn Smith. I'm from Coweta County. I represent House District 70, which is part of Coweta and part of Carroll, and I chair Natural Resource and Environment Committee. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman Smith. And I'm going to say a special thanks to Chairman Lynn Smith for making it here. She's recently had an accident, and she's got some real grit to be here, and I appreciate you. I also want to say thanks to Georgia Southern, my alma mater, for hosting us here. Brian Harris, I don't see him in the room, but there he is. Thank you very much for all the effort you put in to put us here. I told Brian he was a little nervous about the meeting. I said, Bud, we started in a barn, so we've come a long way, and air conditioning and everything. So thank you very much, Georgia Southern. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm David Jenkins, representative for State House District 136, portions of Coweta, Meriwether, and Troup County in the vicinity of Noonan and LaGrange.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Trey Rhodes. I represent District 124. I'm from Greene County, Lake Oconee. That's my home county, and the district is all of Greene, parts of Putnam, all of Tolliver, all of Oglethorpe, and a portion of Clark.
Stan Gunter, I'm out of North Georgia, District 8, live in Blairsville, represent Union County, Towns County, and most of White County.
I'm Victor Anderson, represent District 10. I'm from Cornelia, Georgia. District 10 is Habersham and Rabun counties.
Good morning. My name is Rob Leverett. I'm from District 123. I live in Elberton. My district includes all of Elbert, Lincoln, and Wilkes counties, and part of Madison, and a precinct or two in Columbia. And I would just say I feel a great sense of reunion coming down here. Probably one of my greatest friends growing up in Elberton played for Irk Russell down here, and I came down here a few times to visit him. So I want to thank the school for what they did for him, and also thank Georgia Southern for nurturing our chairman through to a degree. I'm sure that was a Herculean task at the time.
Hey, thank you, Chairman, for that. Chairman David Knight is on his way, so he may come in a little bit late. He's run into some traffic. So. All right, we're going to get started here with the stakeholder groups, and I'm going to ask Scott with DNR to come up and speak first. And I want to reiterate the reason DNR is here is because we've asked DNR to be here. DNR is not advocating one way or the other. DNR is solely giving us a lay of the land as they've seen it, as they are the enforcer of the law. It has been made mention that they do not interpret the law in some of these committee hearings. The fact of the matter is, if you're enforcing the law, you have to do some interpretation. And they have a high duty to be out there answering a question of law on the banks of our rivers and creeks. So I don't want anybody to read into the fact that DNR is here. They are not advocating for management of any more waters than they've already managed. In fact, they are, to my chagrin, I've tried to get them to put in a public fishing area, and we're still working through that. So it's not the intent of the DNR to advocate for certainly taking of private property rights and exposing our private property owners in the state of Georgia to something that they didn't buy into. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate those remarks. So I'm Scott Robinson. I'm the Chief of the Fisheries Management Section for Georgia Department of Natural Resources. And I'm here to just provide some information, really more on a statewide basis, on how we've handled this issue in the past and some of the diversity in Georgia's rivers and the importance of fishing here in this state. You know, fishing is fishing is a socially and economically important part of Georgia's culture and heritage. It generates about $1.5 billion in retail sales in Georgia each year. It's responsible for about 15,000 jobs and over $600 million in salaries and wages. So fishing is really important to us. It's a destination for a lot of people to come to Georgia and fish. The world record largemouth bass was caught in a Georgia river, and that record stood for over 90 years. World record red-breast sunfish was caught in the Satilla River last year. So we have a long history of excellent fishing in rivers and streams, and really it's an iconic part of our culture. Some of the things that WRD does to enhance fishing and help manage fishing and fishing access around the state. We stock a lot of fish. We operate 10 fish hatcheries. 3 of those are cold water trout hatcheries, and 7 are warm water hatcheries that produce things like brim and largemouth bass and striped bass, those sorts of species. So we stocked in the past year about 9 million fish around the state. Around 1 million of those were trout. About 4 million of those fish actually go to support riverine fisheries in some manner or another. We do a lot of fish surveys. We've conducted over 250 surveys last year monitoring fish populations in rivers, streams, and reservoirs all around the state to set regulations and determine stocking rates. We also have built and maintained over 250 boat ramps around the state. Many of those are also on rivers. Those provide access to anglers and boaters all over the state. Big part of the economic impact of fishing. We operate public fishing areas, and we'd be glad to operate one more. Yeah, just need a little support there. We get about 800,000 visitors a year at our public fishing areas, so that gives you some indication of how popular they are. And we also do a lot of habitat work and a lot of outreach and education to teach people how to fish responsibly and legally. So fishing is part of the Georgia culture. As I mentioned, it's also part of the Georgia Constitution. Fishing and hunting are protected in the Georgia Constitution. The state is considered to own all wildlife. What that means is that we can manage wildlife for the public good. That gives us the ability to invest public funds into wildlife management, fisheries management, and protect those wildlife for the good of the people of the state. And we're required to manage those wildlife in accordance with sound principles of wildlife management and science. So what we're talking about here today, navigable streams and rivers and the rights of landowners around those navigable streams. There's the law. As you mentioned, I am not here to advocate for a change in state law. I have not done that at any of these meetings, and I don't intend to. So thank you for making that statement earlier. We have this law here. You can read it, so I don't think I really need to read it. I would point out one part of it there that mentions in whole or part of the year. We've held these meetings in October, which is typically a very low flow month, so most of the rivers you've seen this month are at a low point. When rivers were as important as roads to commerce, people planned around the seasonal flows of the rivers, and they would transport things when the river flows were proper for transport, which often is in the springtime when you see the highest flows. So just the legislature at the time this law was passed felt that was an important piece to put in there, that a part of the year also makes it navigable. And of course, the rights of owners of lands adjacent to navigable streams extend to the low water mark in the bed of the stream. Anything outside of that, and you're trespassing on private property. Let's see. Landowner stream rights on non-navigable streams, the owner owns to the center of the stream bed with exclusive fishing rights to the center of the stream. And if they own both sides of the stream, then they own the entire stream bed and control access and fishing in that stream. So there's a lot of different ways to look at navigability. The law, again, talks about freight, transport of freight and commerce. That's what state law says. There are other things in federal law, and there's other things in federal consideration. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has designated some rivers in Georgia as navigable according to federal law. They actually have a couple of different lists, and there's federal case law supporting public use of both types of streams. So economics is a big part of this, of course. The state, I've received a lot of correspondence on this issue, and I received something this week, and the writer made a statement at the end, and I'll paraphrase a little bit. It basically said, public benefits should be paid for by the public. I completely agree with that, and as such, the state has invested millions of dollars in the public benefits that these rivers provide. Over the years, even beginning with statehood, the legislature would invest in navigability of these rivers, keeping them open for passage and open for fishing for people. So we've, again, invested millions of public dollars in this access and the public benefits that these rivers provide. I think it's important to note that. And so, as the chairman mentioned, over the years in DNR, we've had to make some decisions on whether or not a river is navigable. We're not changing laws or advocating for changes in laws. We just have to make decisions on a practical basis to conduct our business of wildlife management and fishing access. So a lot of the factors that figure into that, some of them are listed here, but we look at, first of all, current state law, current federal law, recent court cases, research on traditional use, past state and federal legislative documents. We have reams of documents regarding navigability of rivers and streams in Georgia. Rivers defined by the federal government, again, as navigable. And then we've also looked at stream characteristics, those physical characteristics of streams. And I've mentioned before, we've seen some thresholds of 200 to 400 CFS mean annual flow that seem to fall in line with what we've considered navigable rivers based on the state law. That's not anything used as a substitute for law. It's just a practical way for us to assess the size of a stream and the ability of it to fit the definition of navigability. So with that, I'll wrap it up with a map. This map shows in yellow all the rivers and streams that are above 400 CFS, mean annual flow in North Georgia, and we split that up. South Georgia here, you'll see, again, some of those iconic rivers like the Ocmulgee and the Satilla on there as considered navigable rivers, open to public access. That will conclude my remarks, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll move on.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Jake Tinch up. Jake Tinch from Georgia Agribusiness.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate you allowing me time to speak this morning, and thank you for all of your work on this committee. I know it's been a lot of time and a lot of listening, so I appreciate it. Like the chairman said, I'm Jake Tinch. I'm with Georgia Agribusiness Council. We're a trade association that represents pretty much the entire scope of agriculture in this state. I'm usually not a notes guy, but however, I had the distinct pleasure at about 2 a.m. last night of listening to my neighbor in the hotel go through their tap dancing routine. And so I'm going to heavily refer to my notes because I'm afraid if I let my mind wander, I might try to reenact that performance for you all. So, we know that this committee was originally formed to look at fishing access, but specifically upon the signing of Senate Bill 115, it's been noted that the governor's office would be considering recommendations from this committee in relation to industries and individuals impacted by this legislation. We appreciate that throughout this study, the committee meetings and the members of this committee have reiterated their longstanding support of the ag industry and private property rights as it relates to creeks, streams, and rivers in our state. We firmly believe that farms and agribusinesses are the greatest stewards of Georgia's natural resources and are the driving force of conservation of those very resources. In regards to Senate Bill 115, our primary concern lies with the codification of the public trust doctrine here in Georgia. Georgia has long held tidal waters in trust of state pursuant to the public trust doctrine. While this doctrine has been recognized for years, we believe that the expansion of its application to streams and riverbeds will directly impact the rights of private property owners and will also create an increased duty for the state regarding the management and regulation of fish populations and related resources adjacent or connected to those waterways deemed as navigable. Historically, the public trust doctrine in Georgia did not extend to those non-tidal waterways and the beds underneath them. Senate Bill 115 significantly broadens that doctrine, making the state the trustee of all navigable streams in the state of Georgia. And we believe that this expansion would result in unintended consequences for not only private property owners and other agribusinesses, but the state as well. Another concern is the increased litigation that this law invites to both private property owners adjacent and connected to those waters, or against the state as the trustee of those waters for its potential failures to properly manage the resources in and around those streams. Private landowners might find themselves facing conflicts with other members of the public, increased regulation by the state, potential lawsuits, and significant limitations on the rights to enjoy and use their own property for business or recreation. The state might also find itself adverse to landowners who are looking for compensation for their land that they can no longer control under constitutional takings and related claims. It is important to underscore that the private property rights are the cornerstone of this nation's legal system and the fundamental aspect of our way of life in the ag industry or in any industry in general. The potential encroachment on these rights through the codification of this expansive public trust doctrine should be carefully considered. However, it was passed without proper consideration and debate during the traditional committee process. Unfortunately, this bill, like I said, did not go through that process, so the stakeholders and private property owners did not have the opportunity to voice their concerns and reservations for the bill. In closing, we ask you to reconsider Senate Bill 115 and its potential consequences for the state, private property owners, and agribusinesses across our state. We believe in a balanced approach that preserves the public interest while protecting the rights of private property owners. This law directly hits on the delicate balance between preserving our natural resources for the next generations of Georgians and continuing to make Georgia a great state for agribusiness and business in general. In our opinion, the adoption of Senate Bill 115 has had the unintended consequence of increasing the duties of the state's environmental regulators and allowing the very groups that propose this legislation to exert additional pressure on those already a lot of times overworked and understaffed positions in the environmental regulation sector. Although we have heard from a lot of our friends on the other side of this issue that there is no intent for using this legislation to bring increased lawsuits or bring any suit of any kind, this will bring a very real threat of litigation against private landowners and the state itself. We're not just talking about private parties, but the state. Many of these same groups are saying that are saying these things have actually brought suit within the past year against the state of North Carolina on this very doctrine. Again, we would like to thank this committee for their time and the consideration of these important issues. We know that you are all committed to find a solution, and we respect each and every one of you and look forward to working with you to find something that works for all Georgians. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Any questions? Appreciate you.
Thanks.
Adam Bellflower, Georgia Farm Bureau. Adam, you've been at every meeting, right?
Yes, sir.
Very good.
This was not quite as bad of a drive as Old Toccoa, but Old Toccoa was very pretty, so I enjoyed that. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Adam Bellflower with Georgia Farm Bureau. Your former colleague in the House and our president, Tom McCall, says hello and hates he cannot be here with us today. With about 250,000 member families across the state, we represent farmers from every county and across all commodities grown in Georgia. We are a grassroots organization that works to ensure the voice of farmers is heard in the legislature, both in Atlanta and Washington, D.C. I get the privilege of being here today to represent the farmers of our state. Many of our members wanted to be here today but could not afford to leave the fields. We're in the thick of harvest season, and with the weather like this, most of our folks must continue to get their crop out of the field. Know that what I'm here to say today is the sentiment of farmers across the state of Georgia. The members of this committee have stood by agriculture and the farmers of Georgia during their time in the General Assembly. You all have continued to prioritize the agricultural industry, and due to the work of this General Assembly, agriculture remains the #1 industry in the state of Georgia. The food and fiber produced by farmers in Georgia is vital for the success of our nation. We also want to acknowledge the diligent work of the Department of Natural Resources and the Wildlife Resource Division to manage public property. They maintain over 500,000 acres of lakes, 12,000 miles of warm water streams, and 4,000 miles of trout streams, all open to the public to enjoy and use. This is a great avenue for the public to enjoy fishing and hunting, as I do myself. Water is one of the most important resources a farmer relies on to be successful. Farmers pay premiums for land that has water access, whether that be groundwater or surface water. The property owned by farmers is appraised with water access playing a significant factor in the evaluation. As we learned last week, Georgia operates under riparian water rights, and the landowner secures rights to the water which abuts or is under their property. Ever since statehood, Georgia has maintained riparian water rights, and the legislature has protected the individual property rights that accompanies ownership. Many landowners and property owners have spoken out at previous hearings about their fear of expanding the definition of navigable in Georgia. However, we trust the committee and appreciate you all declaring it is not the intention to expand, only clarify navigable waters. We affirm it would be detrimental to our state to expand the definition of navigable waters. Upon the passage of Senate Bill 115 at the end of the past legislative session, we saw our state's historical understanding of water rights changed. Senate Bill 115 introduced public trust doctrine in navigable streams of Georgia and grants everyone the ability to use and enjoy all navigable streams capable of use for fishing, hunting, passage, navigation, commerce, and transportation. This erodes the property rights previously held by the landowner of their riparian water. We have come today to voice our concerns with this bill. We have been assured the study committee is the appropriate venue to receive suggested amendments to the language in Senate Bill 115. Senate Bill 115 takes certain exclusive rights of a landowner and gives them to the public. Before the passage of Senate Bill 115, the public only had the right to pass or traverse on navigable waterways. Navigable waterways were seen as a means of transportation and commerce, and specifically defined as waters capable of performing the stated task. Years of case law in Georgia have supported these exclusive rights. Private property owners have lost their exclusive rights obtained through ownership, surveys, deeds, and taxes due to the passage of Senate Bill 115. The introduction of public trust doctrine to Georgia's navigable waterways also puts the state at risk of lawsuit. As stated during stakeholder presentations at the first study committee meeting, Senate Bill 115 does not create a private right of action to sue permit holders. However, people could sue the state of Georgia for violating the public trust if the issuance of that permit infringes on the public's right to fish, hunt, or pass. Senate Bill 115 has now created a legal environment where all a plaintiff needs to file a lawsuit against a state-issued permit is to believe their right to enjoy and use a navigable water is being infringed upon. In the agricultural industry, farmers who irrigate must obtain an agricultural water withdrawal permit issued by EPD. We have learned in the past couple of decades, through a long legal battle with our neighboring states, that groundwater withdrawals directly impact surface water flows along the lower Flint River. We fear the public trust doctrine being weaponized against farmers in that region during times of drought to prohibit irrigation because the groundwater withdrawals are interfering with the public's ability to use and enjoy the water. This logic demonstrates why Senate Bill 115 is dangerous for the agricultural industry and does not align with the General Assembly's history of supporting agriculture. As far-reaching as this may sound, it fits within the reasoning of many other lawsuits we have seen across the nation involving public trust. That is why the General Assembly has intentionally avoided codification of public trust doctrine and water policy over the past few decades. Its inclusion through Senate Bill 115 unfairly tips the scales and opens the state and those they permit to subjective standards beyond permits and best management practices. Again, for many years, the General Assembly has successfully protected navigable waters while intentionally avoiding codification of the public trust doctrine past coastal waters due to the effect that it could have on private property rights. If the legislator wants to explore opening Georgia's navigable waters to fishing, we believe it should do so in a very tailored approach, but not by introducing a broad, overreaching common law doctrine to a vital resource. Farmers cannot afford the instability Senate Bill 115 brings to such a vital resource. The ability to use water is crucial for the success of farmers. By placing water in trust to the public and prioritizing their use and enjoyment, removing the riparian rights of the landowner, we introduce a level of instability that is detrimental to farmers and property owners. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'd be willing to field those.
Thank you, Adam. Any questions of the committee? None. Hearing none, I'm going to move on. Thank you, Adam. Damon Mullis, Ogeechee Riverkeeper.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Damon Mullis, and I'm the Executive Director of Ogeechee Riverkeeper. We are a nonprofit that works to protect, preserve, and improve the water quality of our basin. In addition to our work to keep the waters of the basin clean, we organize paddle trips, litter cleanups, and other events to regularly get people out on the water to explore and appreciate the natural beauty of our basin. Just last April, we restarted a very popular paddle race on the Canoochee River in Evans County and plan to continue hosting the event annually. We also regularly encourage the general public and our members to get out and explore our waterways on their own. We developed a recreational toolkit, a map to assist people in planning their own outings a couple of years ago, and are regularly adding new information. But even with online guidance, we regularly have people reach out asking us questions about access. We tell them that stretches of river between public boat ramps are for public recreation and remind them that camping along the river is trespassing unless it's a public area that allows it or they have permission from the property owner. There's a fair amount of non-consumptive, non-fishing recreational activity on the Ogeechee and Canoochee rivers, and we're seeing that increase. But by far, fishing is how the vast majority of people spend their time on our rivers. Fishing these rivers is a tradition that goes back many generations. Fathers take their children to the same spots that their fathers and grandfathers took them. This custom and these traditional fishing areas run deep and are important to these families and part of the fabric of our community and their way of life. There's certainly a need to clarify what areas are for public access and which are not, and I welcome that clarification. But when making those decisions, please keep in mind tradition and customs and where people have historically had access to fish. Those places are important to people, and rightly so. Those traditional fishing areas are part of who we are as a people. Please do not take them away. Please let me know if our organization can help you in any way to help identify traditional use areas. We'd be happy to help. Thank you for your time, your public service. I greatly appreciate both.
Thank you, Damon. Any questions of the committee? Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony today. I'm just curious, when you refer to places where traditionally the public has been able to fish, yes, are these actual public fishing areas, or are you talking about places just where by custom the public has been able to come over time, even though it's private property boarding it?
Well, I'm referring to those areas that people have traditionally been accessing through public boat ramps, and stretches of rivers that people, have really, that they learn, they know, that they take their family, it's kind of their part of the river. What we're asking is just to protect what people have traditionally had access to. We're not looking for any expansion whatsoever.
And is the Ogeechee, I'm assuming, would be considered navigable in these public areas, the places where public traditionally would fish?
I would make the argument that the state wouldn't have public access if it weren't navigable, and so yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess what I was saying is, you're saying that even if it's not navigable, there would still be access, but I was asking a question if you think, and if you don't know,
right,
I'm not, that I would assume most of these places on the Ogeechee are areas where the where the Geechee is navigable, and thus there, even under traditional Georgia law, there would still be some public access along those stretches of the river.
I believe that to be true, yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I
Yes.
just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Let's see here. Gonna ask Mike Worley. I got a little bit out of order here. I apologize. Mike Worley with the Georgia Wildlife Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members. It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to join you in singling out Chairwoman Smith just for the simple fact that she and I have a bit of history. We've worked together a lot on a couple of big issues, and since they just finished up getting the applications for the next round of GOSA, Chairwoman Smith is the godmother. I think of her as the godmother of GOSA, so thank you for all of your service. Just was something to think about I was thinking about that last week as they were closing out those applications. Real pleasure to be here. It is, we all know this is an important issue and one that clearly the House leadership has entrusted you to consider. My name is Mike Worley. I'm President and CEO of Georgia Wildlife Federation, and I'm here today to sort of lay out the background of this issue and clearly state also what Georgia Wildlife Federation's position is on this fishing access to freshwater resources. Let me tell you a little bit about who we are as an organization. Georgia Wildlife Federation is Georgia's oldest member-supported statewide conservation organization. We were established in 1936. We worked with the legislature, with the agencies, all of our partners throughout the year, providing leadership, services, and advocacy on conservation issues across the state. Georgia Wildlife Federation is a proponent for the professional, science-based management of our wildlife and our natural resources. And Georgia Wildlife Federation has long been a leading voice in the efforts to protect and enhance our natural systems and to protect the rights and heritage of our state's hunters and anglers. So, sort of to lay the background out for this issue, we've heard lots of talk so far already about the fact that there are going to be lawsuits associated with the legislation that was just recently passed. I'd like to point out that in 2022, we already had a lawsuit. In 2022, a landowner demanded, via a lawsuit against the state, that Georgia DNR law enforcement and local law enforcement folks ticket anglers for fishing on a portion of the Flint River that had been judged by Georgia DNR to be navigable and that had been publicly fished by generations of Georgians. We stated our position at that time that navigable streams should be available to the public to fish. We fully expected to pursue that position through the legal proceedings. On March 27, 2023, our Georgia DNR Commissioner signed what we believe to be an ill-advised consent to that lawsuit, laying out a formula for which anyone with property along any of Georgia's navigable rivers could likely establish their own claims of owning exclusive fishing rights. On March 29, 2023, the last day of the legislative session, the Georgia General Assembly passed Senate Bill 115 that corrected the mistakes made in that consent agreement. Senate Bill 115 is 3 sentences long. It simply restates what had always been the case here in Georgia. Navigable streams are open to the public for fishing. It does not in any way enable the public to access private property. Before Senate Bill 115 passed, after Senate Bill 115 passed, after the governor signed it, after it became effective July the 1st, trespass was both illegal in all of those cases and still is. Time has proven the General Assembly was correct in passage of Senate Bill 115 and that the urgency was there. Another lawsuit, almost identical to the first one, has been filed seeking to prevent the public from fishing on that navigable Flint River already. I want to thank y'all for being engaged. Thank you for studying this critical issue. It seems our hunting and fishing traditions are always under assault these days, and it seems it's up to us to pass them along to future generations. I'd like to be perfectly clear on one thing. Several folks have questioned this, and I've said it multiple times at these meetings. Georgia Wildlife Federation is in favor of the public being able to fish on navigable streams, just as we, the public, have always been able. We are not advocating for expanding what is navigable. We're not advocating for expanding fishing access onto those streams that have been judged non-navigable in the past. I think, in essence, that goes along with almost all the testimony we've heard over the last 3 or 4 meetings. But I really appreciate the time to be able to stand here in front of you, and I'm glad to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Morley. Any questions from committee? No questions. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
I'm going to go to Neil Fleckenstein, Tall Timber Land Conservancy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Neil Fleckenstein. I work for Tall Timbers Research Station and Land Conservancy. I want to echo what Mike said in terms of our appreciation for Chairwoman Smith and all the great work on GOSA. We worked with Birdsong Nature Center on the conservation of that amazing property with some wonderful partners. So thank you so much for your leadership there. I'll be brief. I'm used to a 3-minute limit on public comments, so I'll try and hit that. Again, I work for Tall Timbers Research Station, and I want to sincerely thank you all for all the time that you've invested in this issue. I've watched all the meetings. One of them I actually watched parts of it twice, and I understand the time commitment that you all have made, and it's much appreciated for Georgians all around the state. For those who don't know, Tall Timbers Research Station and Land Conservancy, we're nationally known as the birthplace of the study of prescribed fire. We're an advocate for the use of prescribed fire for both ecological purposes and also wildfire mitigation. Increasingly, we're doing a lot of work on the legislative side of things federally, trying to deal with our national issues with wildfire. We're a national leader in quail research, a leader in non-game bird research, and we're one of the largest land conservancies in Georgia and Florida. We work with a broad range of landowners on all the issues that I just mentioned. In terms of land conservation, we currently hold permanent conservation easements on about 107,000 acres of land in Georgia, mostly in southwest Georgia, in 18 counties. We work with a broad range of landowners. I think we have easements as small as 10 acres and as large as about 6,000 acres and everything in between. Regardless of the size of the property, one common thread that I see with all of our landowners is that they are exceptional stewards of the land and water and wildlife resources on their property. I was just going to discuss some of the perspectives that I've heard from our landowners about the issue of fishing access, but first I just want to make clear that Tall Timbers completely supports the public's right to fish, float, and utilize the state's navigable waters. That's never been an issue of concern for our organization, and we have several navigable waterways in the areas that we work in. In regard to SB 115 and HR 519, I've spoken with many landowners in the last 3 months. The number one issue of concern for them is the possibility of expanding the definition of what constitutes a navigable waterway. It's not even close. Any other concern they've got, it's that potential expansion of that definition is a concern for them. Landowners and Tall Timbers are concerned that a change to that definition could open up to the public very small streams and tributaries that are deep into private properties, many of the properties that we have under conservation easement. Streams that do not meet the definition of what has historically been navigable in the state of Georgia, which as we all know, is basically a commercially based definition. Specifically, we've heard concerns from landowners that expanding the definition of navigable, as you've heard from others, would constitute a taking of private property rights without just compensation. And we've heard a lot of concern about increased access into properties, trespassing, poaching, and especially safety issues from hunters accessing the interior of private properties via previously non-navigable waterways. I know these concerns aren't going to be new to the subcommittee. Just about every member of the public who spoke at the last two meetings kind of expressed similar concerns, so I know we're kind of repeating some territory here. I have greatly appreciated hearing a number of members of the committee state their support for the protection of private property rights of Georgians following comments in these meetings. And I also appreciated my colleague from the Georgia Wildlife Federation and his comments about not advocating for expanding what is navigable in the state, and we greatly appreciate that. In closing, I'll just restate our support for the public's right to utilize our navigable waterways. And I would respectfully ask that the committee not recommend expanding or broadening the definition of navigable waters in the state of Georgia. And I greatly appreciate the opportunity to comment and invite you all to come down to Tall Timbers Research Station anytime you want to talk about quail or conservation or prescribed fire. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Very good. Any questions on the committee? Hearing none, we'll move on. We got Dale Sandlin, Georgia Cattlemen's Association. Dale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Dale Sandlin, Executive Vice President of Georgia Cattlemen's Association. I want to tell you a little story about actually learning what navigability could be. Being originally from a small town in West Texas, we're not used to a lot of open water fishing, and so when I got the opportunity to go fish on Yellow Jacket Shoals back in August, I jumped at the chance, largely because I wanted to see what the difference was. Now, I'm used to fishing on ponds and giant tackle box, and over the course of about a 4-hour period, I learned two things very quickly. The Flint River is non-navigable at Yellow Jacket Shoals because I couldn't walk around to save my life. And at the end of the day, three things got broken. I broke my tailbone, I broke a fishing rod, and I broke my pride. So I'm here to tell you that firsthand experience, I personally do not believe the Flint River Yellow Jacket Shoals is navigable. Now, that could also mean that I wasn't outfitted correctly, and that's a very distinct possibility. Maybe the next time I get to go, I'll be better equipped. But I won't belabor the points that have already been made as far as navigability itself, the taking of private property. I want to focus on the things that are important for the cattle industry. Those items are important as well. But one of the biggest things that our industry has to focus on daily is the health and well-being of our livestock. Having the ability to have people that are not related to the farm, that are not focused in cattle production, by allowing them to traverse a stream to get into the middle of what was once private property, could institute the potential for a biosecurity issue. One of the biggest things that whether it's intended or unintended, one of the things that our industry is concerned about is foot and mouth disease. It's rampant across the world. We haven't had an outbreak here since 1929, and God willing, we won't. But at the same time, having that potential exist is going to be detrimental to our industry. And in fact, the amount of exports that we have in this country for the beef industry is about $19 billion. Georgia's portion of that, if we ever have a foot and mouth outbreak, you're looking at $53 million gone in value to cattle producers in Georgia. We don't want to see that. We certainly don't want to have our members and our producers have to deal with that. Safety considerations is another item that was mentioned, but specifically for the cattle and the people that might be in those streams. If we're moving livestock around, we have to know what's there. We have to know who's there. Because at the end of the day, if we're moving cattle through a stream crossing and someone's down there, they can get hurt really fast. And at the end of the day, the liability, and again, looking at lawsuits, the liability for that is not on the person that's in the stream, it's on the landowner that technically, under SB 115, doesn't really own that land anymore. So at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that everyone is safe. We got to make sure that the cattle producer, that the landowner, that the ability to enjoy our natural resources is first and foremost. Cattle producers are one of the original environmentalists. Without our natural resources being in good shape, we don't have an industry, and we certainly can't pass it on to the next generation. So we know that y'all have got some big decisions to make. We know that there's a lot of time and effort put in place as far as being at these hearings and hearing from all of the constituencies. But at the end of the day, the impact of SB 115 and the way in which it was passed is significantly more than what seems to be on the surface. So with that, I'll answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dale. Any questions out of the committee? No questions. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we're going to take a 10-minute recess, coffee and water break. So we'll come back at 10:05. All right? Thank you. All right, we're going to come back to order. I'm running 2 minutes behind. I apologize. And then there was another gentleman, this Ben Boyd, would like to speak.
Okay.
Ben Boyd, he's a farmer.
You can go in whatever order you want.
Okay. All right, if April Lipscomb would come to the podium, we'll get back going.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Y'all have heard from me 3 other times now. I don't want to repeat too much of the same information. But today, we are here in Statesboro, we're a little bit closer to the coast, closer to Tidewater, so I thought it might be helpful for y'all to hear a little bit of the history of riverbed ownership, Tidewater bed ownership, and fishing rights on the coast. Just because it might be instructive or helpful kind of moving forward and seeing how that has been applied on the coast and whether you want to apply that to other waters in the state moving forward. So, as I've mentioned to y'all already, under the English common law, the Crown generally owned the beds of all tidal waters. These were deemed navigable waters, so waters that were subject to the ebb and flow of the tide. The beds of those tidal waters actually extended up to the high water mark. So that was the kind of boundary of the bed, the high water mark. And the Crown owned those beds in trust for the public. So the public had the right to use those tide waters for fishing, navigation, and commerce. Georgia then adopted that English common law when it became a state, and that was sort of the rule of, the rule in Georgia. So I want to talk a little bit about oysters. And I know y'all probably heard a lot about oysters when a couple years ago we adopted the new law on oyster beds. But after we adopted the English common law, oyster beds in Georgia generally became depleted. So there were too many people taking oysters from in between the low water mark and the high water mark on the Georgia coast. And so the oysters were just disappearing. And the oystermen were not replanting oysters because they were concerned that, well, I'm going to spend all this money planting oysters, but then anybody from the public can just come take them, so I'm not going to spend that money, right? And so, and this was confirmed in a case, Johnson v. State, that, yeah, the state of Georgia does own all the way to the high water mark, so sorry, oystermen, people can just come take your oysters. In response to that, the state basically realized we want to have a healthy oyster beds. We want to make sure that people that put money into planting oysters can reap the benefits of their work and investment. So in 1902, the state of Georgia passed a new law that changed some of this bed ownership in tidewaters. So that law made a distinction between navigable and non-navigable tidewaters. And the law said that title to the beds of non-navigable tidewaters vested in the owner of the adjacent land for all purposes, including the exclusive right to the oysters, clams, and other shellfish. So for non-navigable tidewaters, exclusive ownership. That's similar to what we've seen in the Georgia Code for non-navigable streams, right, where the owners have exclusive rights in possession. For navigable waters, the law established that the rights of adjacent landowners extended down to the low water mark, and that adjacent landowners of navigable tidewaters had the exclusive right to the oysters and clams, but not the fish. Chairman's already got a question.
So what happened to the ownership of the land in navigable streams prior to, you're saying that the law changed when they put in the statute for navigable streams? Is that right?
So we had English common law, right? So you had tidewaters owned by the state, non-tidal waters owned by private people.
And this public trust that you're talking about is generally the common law that came into place, is that right?
Right, from England. And so in 1863, Georgia adopted the code, our original code. That's when they changed the definition of navigable and non-navigable stream, so non-tidal waters.
So what happened to the ownership prior to 1863?
That's when we had a bunch of state grants, right? So the state, issued land grants and land lotteries, and under common law, if you were deemed to own, or if you owned land adjacent to a stream, any kind of inland stream, non-tidal, you were deemed to own to the center thread of the river.
Okay.
Prior to 1863.
Right.
And then any kind of grant after 1863, you only had rights down to the low water mark.
So in 1863, when this bill came into place, they lost their title to the center of the river or whatever it was?
So the law on navigable streams has not changed. I'm talking right now just about tidewaters. So for tidewaters, we originally said...
I'm a bit confused then,
Yeah.
because I thought you were getting into the streams.
I'm just talking about tidewaters right now. Navigable and non-navigable tidewaters.
Okay.
So the state made a distinction between navigable tidewaters and non-navigable tidewaters.
All
and
right, so
said-
the ownership of land on what we now have navigable streams is still with the landowner? Is that what, or are you telling me now that it's just to the low water mark?
On which, on freshwater or coastal streams?
Freshwater.
So freshwater, the law in Georgia has generally always been that the adjacent landowner who can trace title to a pre-1863 grant owns to the center thread of the river. Any grant that happened after 1863, their land stops at the high water mark, but they have rights down to the low water mark for agricultural purposes, mostly, and for riparian uses. So they can put piers, docks, things like that into the low water mark.
Okay.
You good?
Go ahead.
Okay. So back to non-navigable tidewaters, though. So the state made this distinction and gave private property rights, essentially, to non-navigable tidewaters and exclusive oyster harvesting rights on navigable tidewaters to adjacent landowners. And the definition they adopted for navigable tidewaters is essentially the same as the definition for navigable inland waters, which is, they have to be, capable of carrying boats laden with freight for a whole part of the year, and the rafting of wood. Small boats carrying timber, those do not make a stream navigable. So that was the law in Georgia in 1902. And then nothing happened for a really long time on the coast until about 1970. So one day a couple of guys were out fishing in a tidal waterway, and they were charged with fishing in private waters without permission. And the landowner argued this was a non-tidal or a non-navigable tidewater, and so they had the exclusive right to possess that non-navigable tidewater, and these guys were fishing without permission. The anglers were actually acquitted, And then they sued for malicious prosecution and false imprisonment. Said we weren't fishing, we had a right to fish, et cetera. This went all the way up to the Supreme Court. But the Georgia Court of Appeals has an interesting decision. I'm going to give all this stuff to y'all in written format so y'all can look at it too. But the Court of Appeals reviewed the common law and these 1902 laws and made a lot of interesting observations, at least to me. So first, the court recognized that the public does have a right to fish in all tidewaters under the common law. It doesn't matter if they're navigable or non-navigable. The public have the right to fish. Second, the court noted that the state can actually convey soil without an exclusive right to fish. So the state can convey the beds of tidewaters subject to the public right to fish. And third, the court noted that a grant of the soil beneath tidewaters does not automatically convey the fishing rights unless there is a clear and express intent to do so. So although the court didn't really put this in terms of public trust concepts, it basically recognized that because we have this long-standing recognition that the public has the right to fish in tidewaters, we're not going to give away that right unless we say expressly and clearly that we're doing that.
If the deed specifically says they have the fishing rights,
Then they had them.
then they have them.
That's right.
And do you happen to know how often that occurs?
So, to my knowledge, it has not.
No deed has ever
in
deeded
Georgia.
away?
I'm not aware of any. But it also pertains to the law, too. So the court then looked at that 1902 statute and said, well, these statutes talk about exclusive rights to oysters and clams and shellfish. They do not talk about exclusive rights to fish. So the law itself doesn't, give away the right to fish. So these guys are fine. They could fish in a non-navigable tidewater and be okay. They still could they could not take shellfish. Yeah, if they had taken shellfish, they would have had a problem. But they could have the right to fish. So the Court of Appeals basically concluded that even if a private landowner owned the beds of any kind of tidewater, the public still had the right to fish based on English common law. That case was overturned, though, by the Georgia Supreme Court on other grounds. They basically said that the sheriff there had probable cause to arrest the guy, so there was no malicious prosecution or false imprisonment. But the Supreme Court never went back and adjusted or rebutted any of the findings that the Court of Appeals made on these the public right to fish. So, and that's the only case that we have on fishing in tidewaters. So it's just instructive, even if it may now be sort of non-binding. So several years after that, in State versus Ashmore, the Supreme Court determined that the owners of land adjacent to navigable tidewaters don't actually own down to the low water mark. They just have the rights down to the low water mark. And they based that language or that holding somewhat on the inland stream definition for navigable streams. Because the 1863 law for inland freshwater navigable streams says that adjacent landowners have rights down to the low water mark, not title. So again, that's just an important distinction. And the Supreme Court noted that this interpretation comports with the general principle that a public grant is construed strictly against the grantee and nothing is taken by prescription. And I'm sorry if those words mean nothing to the non-lawyers. So then in 1992, the General Assembly passed the Protection of Tidewaters Act. So this is 1992. And that act officially declares that Georgia became the owner of the beds of all tidewaters as successor to the Crown and by the common law. It also says the state continues to hold title to the beds of all tidewaters except where title in a private party can be traced to a valid Crown or state grant that explicitly conveyed the beds of such tidewaters. So seems like we've gone back now. So even though we have the statute that says non-navigable tidewaters are owned by private parties, we now have a new statute in 1992 that says, no, that's not true. There's no case law interpreting this. There's no case law that says that the 1902 law on that has been repealed or overturned. So also kind of an interesting just dynamic there to make y'all aware of.
Taxing those properties, right?
In some cases, they may be, yeah. So whether the state should be doing that or not or the counties or whoever is another question.
Okay.
So the Tidewaters Act also states that Georgia, as sovereign, is trustee of the rights of the people of the state to use and enjoy all tidewaters, which are capable of use for fishing, passage, navigation, commerce, and transportation pursuant to the common law public trust doctrine. So the kind of big takeaways from this, Georgia did not formally recognize the public trust doctrine as a legal doctrine for tidewaters until 1992. So we had kind of loosely talked about the public trust concepts, the right to fish, but never really adopted this legal doctrine until the 90s. And for those public trust waters, the courts and the General Assembly have recognized that those beds will not be conveyed to private ownership by implication. So the grants have to explicitly say that we intend to give away the beds of those tidewaters. And the title to beds can transfer to a private individual subject to the public right to fish. So those are sort of the big takeaways. And the reason I wanted to explain all that is because, this all goes back to the concept from England that waters that are held in trust for the public should retain in trust for the public. And you can't just give away those rights unless you are very clear that that is what you intend to do. So I mentioned this earlier, I'm gonna send sort of a packet to you all that has all of the information I've talked about so far, so y'all can re-review it, look through the cases, make your own conclusions. And before I wrap up, I do want to touch for a minute on the public trust and some of the concerns that we've heard earlier about the imposition that expanding the public trust doctrine to navigable waters may impose additional duties on the state, for example. So, there are states, like California, Hawaii, even Mississippi, that have broadly adopted the public trust doctrine, and they have said that, yes, we are going to impose additional duties on our state agencies, for example, to consider whether they're protecting the public trust when they are issuing permits, for example, things like that. There are other states that have rejected that and have said that the purpose of the public trust doctrine is really to protect public access. And so we are not going to impose additional duties on the state to ensure any kind of protection of the public trust unless it goes to access. And so some other states have said that, for example, if the state has adopted regulations to protect water quality or to protect, to ensure that we have enough water in our streams for surface or groundwater withdrawals, we are going to deem that as the state has already proven that his exercised its duties under the trust. So compliance with its own rules and regulations is enough. So the beauty of the public trust doctrine is that the states get to decide the scope of it. So, y'all have heard from the farming, agribusiness community, some of those concerns. If that is a concern, I think my opinion is it's a little bit overblown. I'm not as concerned about it as they are, but I understand it for sure. But y'all have the ability to tailor the scope of the public trust doctrine however you see fit. So with that, I will.
April, hold on, we got Chairman Lynn Smith has a question.
Yes.
And thank you for your presentation, actually for your lecture. And so I've been engaged in lawsuits with the City of Atlanta back in the 1990s on through all of this in several study committees. And one of the distinct measures we were always told that there are two types of law. One is the eastern water law with Mississippi River. The other is the left, which is a different form of water law. So I don't want our committee to be confused thinking we need to do what California's doing.
That's right.
They're in another world. They kill people over water. Over here, just remember the movies and such as that back then. So you're trying to help us compare disparate things, the coast, the state, different places. And so I think that only leads to more confusion. And I appreciate everything you're doing, because it is, I've been on this long journey for 27 years, and so I've lived all these different debates, but there is Eastern water law and Western water law, and we are the eastern side of the Mississippi, which is where that applies. So as we try and do what's best for the citizens of Georgia, we have a long case history of what we do on the eastern part of water law. And I think that will be critical to us, because other than just this battle, again, we will have our water wars with our neighboring states. And I think every step we take has to be a measured state, or we are opening ourselves up to a larger battle. I don't think it's the intention of the people who care so much about this issue, but this is one part of a huge formula, and I just hope the committee never loses sight of that, because I knew during the Magnuson ruling, Judge Magnuson, Atlanta filled in its quarries for the next time to have water. We can lock our state into areas we don't want to be. So right here, the only thing I can say what we're debating, what we're doing right now is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I just hope we get to purgatory so we don't, just mess ourselves up all the way around. So I'm not detracting from what you're saying. There is a huge picture out here. It's like the squirrel getting hit by a car, and everybody says, well, I never saw the car because it was too big. Hello, this is too big. So let's just be methodical about what we do, and as we get this different information, we need to put it in the right categories to help us make just this specific decision. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Gunner.
All right. Ms. Lipscomb, you talked about the 1992 Tidewater law that applies the public trust doctrine. What about Senate Bill 115 to all the streams in the state of Georgia?
Right. So Senate Bill 115 says that, essentially takes the Tidewaters Act language and applies it to navigable streams. So it basically says, yeah, that the state took ownership of the beds of all navigable waters within the state's borders at statehood and trust for the public, which comes directly from United States Supreme Court precedent. And then the state as sovereign holds those waters in trust for the public for them to use them for fishing, passage, et cetera.
But if we ever change that definition of navigability, it could be any stream in the state of Georgia.
Right. So I think, the changing of the definition of navigability for purposes of the public trust doctrine is a big deal. And so I think that's where a lot of the concerns come in, because you could change the definition of navigability and open up some of those rights to streams that historically have not been open. I'm not advocating for that, certainly, and it sounds like nobody else in the room is either. So that's so your point's taken, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Jenkins.
Yeah, so with Senate Bill 115, it cites the public trust doctrine as it relates to fishing. I know there's a lot of concern that creates a cause of action for other matters. However, won't those still be subject to the same regulation? We already regulate water withdrawals and such as that. I'm having a hard time understanding how citing this for the purpose of fishing rights could affect what we already regulate under the public trust doctrine, although it's not stated in so many words. I mean, do you have an opinion on that, or?
So the way that it would work, if somebody could, sue the state of Georgia and try to challenge a permit and say that it violates the public trust. That certainly could happen. And the idea is that, by issuing a certain permit, that issuance of the permit impairs the public trust so that the state should not have issued the permit. That would be the argument. I think that it'd be very hard to make that argument unless you could also prove a violation of, water quality standards or, the standards under like the water withdrawal regulations. It's not to say it couldn't be done, but I do think, given sort of Georgia's history and the way that EPD has done its job in the past, those are hard arguments to make. And I think I mentioned this in the first committee. I would be personally hesitant to bring them unless they were really, really, really bad facts. And in that situation, I don't think EPD wouldn't be doing its job either. And I think this is a good question to ask EPD, actually, and what their interpretation is. My understanding is that this would not change the way they issue permits. This would not change the way that they do their job. And in terms of, like, South Georgia Farms or the water wars, we've seen them make huge strides in managing groundwater resources and surface waters down in the southwest part of the state. And I imagine that will continue, so.
So just one follow-on. If we repealed SB 115 tomorrow, we can't repeal this public trust doctrine. That's English common law. They could still bring a cause of action under the public trust doctrine that whatever we're permitting, is affecting that, or is that not true?
No, that's true. I mean, it is a common law doctrine, and even though Georgia courts have not officially recognized it, somebody could still bring a lawsuit and raise public trust doctrine as the basis for bringing a lawsuit, regardless of SB 115.
You've mentioned these lawsuits, and currently, I think in testimony today, we heard that there's a lawsuit that your organization brought in North Carolina. Is that the case, and is it surrounding this public trust doctrine?
So we did not bring the lawsuit. I think we are representing North Carolina Wildlife Federation as a amicus in that case concerns, I think, shrimp trawlers and the regulations surrounding it's actually like fishing regulations. So the type of equipment they
So it's
can
shrimp
use.
trawlers, and that's salt water, and that
It's
would
salt
be,
water. It'd
be tidal waters, right?
Tide waters.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
Thank you for your testimony. This is always very interesting to get sort of this, treatise on water rights. And I'm not being sarcastic. I think everybody else is laughing. I really do enjoy it. Maybe that says something about me that means I need to be, watched a little more closely.
Yeah, you and me both.
But I do enjoy it, and it does get confusing because I think because of the origins of the law in the English common law, which is primarily based upon a title kind of structure. I know I was getting a little confused too when you were having the discussion with Chairman Gunner because you were talking more about title issues, which are kind of now a thing unto themselves. I think here that this is different from folks up in my district and Stan's district where we don't have any encroachment or estuary or anything like that. But I think the concern is I'm perceiving, and I think you picked up on it too, I think it's almost abject terror over public trust doctrine from a lot of people, is that it would be used by private litigants to challenge permits that have been issued and that have been established for some time and that people have relied upon. And I think to Representative Jenkins' point, my understanding, which is a very nascent, not well developed or studied understanding, is that the public trust doctrine sort of exists, but yet Georgia courts and the Georgia legislature can define the exact textures and parameters of it. We can open the door very wide or open the door just a little bit, or I don't know if we can shut the door, but we can keep it pretty narrowly open. But I think the concern is even if you do anything to open it just a little bit more, it's difficult to gauge what the exact impact would be and to also control what that impact would be. Because the North Carolina case indicates to me, and I think it's a pretty sensible argument, is you can't argue sovereign immunity to prevent a private litigant from suing under the basic of public trust to compel certain outcomes or to challenge certain decisions that have made on a regulatory basis because the doctrine itself sort of lends itself to benefiting the public at large, so they ought to be able to sue to enforce it. So I think that is what I sense scares people more than anything is now this water permit I've had to draw water out of the aquifer for, that my dad had is suddenly now going to be challenged because there's some technical issue with a reg that someone can assert. And I just wonder if you would comment on that. Is there a way you think we as a legislature, if we were to allow that, could restrict or prohibit that sort of thing? Or is it I'm just sort of concerned it's difficult to do. You know, it's kind of like once you crack the door, that it's going to swing a little wider.
Yeah, and that's a fair point and fair concern. I do think there are ways that you could narrowly tailor the public trust doctrine to what you intend it to do. I would need to think a little bit more about what that actually looks like, but I think that's possible for sure. So that's the short answer. I don't have a solution for you right now.
Thank you for a short answer to an extremely painfully long question, so I apologize for that, Mr. Chairman. But I don't purport to speak for everybody, but I sense that's a big concern with public trust doctrine, is sort of this boogabear that they're really worried about, that it would impact their ability to make a living in a way that they've done for a long, long time.
Yeah, I will say I do, and this is just my personal kind of opinion on this after looking at the law. If the committee and the legislature wants to protect fishing rights on navigable streams as currently defined, in my opinion, the public trust doctrine is the best way to ensure that, given some of the other things you and I have discussed about that Bosworth case that I won't bore the rest of y'all with.
Right.
So that's my 2 cents
Well,
on
and my
that.
worry there is we're effectively, in my view, rescinding grants or construction of grants that has been in place for over 100 years, and kind of effectively the net result, I think, would almost seem to be taking back a private property interest that we seem to have conferred by judicial decisions over time. That's the worry I have for that, and I think that's why you have so many people showing up at these meetings.
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you, April. I think that's everything from the committee.
Thanks.
Going to take a quick 5-minute recess, and then we're going to take 2 more before lunch, and then we've got 1, 2, 3. There's only 6 more to testify, so let's take a 5-minute recess, come back at 10:45. All right, thank you, folks. Let's call back to order here, and I'm going to ask that I'm going to go a little bit out of order because we got a farmer that's got to get back to the farm. I understand that, so I'm going to ask Mr. Ben Boyd to come up and speak.
Thank you very much, and I promise you I'll be brief, and I apologize for my attire because I need to be on a tractor right now because I'm not an expert on anything except for myself and my family's farm. And I was born about 25 miles from here in a little town called Sylvania. I grew up about 13 miles from there, and we farm about 60 miles up and down the Savannah River. And I appreciate y'all being here and giving this as much effort as you are, because I don't have any answers. All I can do is tell you about what we do. And we convert water and sunlight into peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. That's what I do for a living. And the way you do that is fighting. And so what I do is fight. We fight weeds, we fight worms, we fight floods, we fight droughts, and a lot of times we fight the calendar. And so while I'm out there fighting, trying to make a crop, I would ask you not to give me anything else to have to fight, because we worry about lawsuits, and I am a non-lawyer for sure. And anytime we get those big words, when my experience is I have to write checks to defend myself, and that scares me. And so what I ask you is to take care of us and our private property rights as best you can, so we don't have to fight the public as well as the worms and the weeds and the floods and the droughts, where we can conserve the environment and feed the world. Because I'm a conservationist, I'm an environmentalist, I'm an outdoorsman, and I'm a farmer. And I'd like to be able to keep doing all those things and to put all my effort into converting sunlight and water into food and T-shirts to feed the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ben. All right, let's go to Jake Matthews, Georgia Forestry. Jake, sorry to skip over, but I think Mr. Boyd has to be on a tractor.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. So appreciate y'all letting me be with you this morning. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Jake Matthews. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Georgia Forestry Association. Like everyone else has already said, I really do want to thank y'all just for a lot of time, a lot of diligence, and a lot of work that y'all put into this. I think it's real clear just how important it is, and really do want to thank you for your work on it. We at GFA, we represent the entire forestry supply chain in Georgia. Many of you know or are well aware that we're the #1 forestry state in the nation, and that's something we take a lot of pride in. But we represent everyone from landowners who, sustainably manage their timberland, to the loggers that harvest that timber, to manufacturers that turn it into things that we rely on each and every day. And then also represent every other step in between that whole process. Our members consider themselves to be true stewards of the land, and they all feel truly a moral and ethical obligation to improve it for future generations. And directly related to the work of this committee is the fact that our entire membership, truly, they're all avid outdoorsmen and women, and they're folks who fish extensively, they hunt. That is something they enjoy, and it is a part of who they are. They also have fishing and hunting leases for third parties on their land. It's a source of income for a lot of those folks as well. But since we were founded in 1907, GFA has really been guided kind of by 3 core principles. Number 1, private property rights, which is why I'm kind of making mention of these here. Number 2, sensible taxes and regulation. And number 3, healthy markets. But I say all that because private property rights is really at the core of who we are as GFA. It's at the core of the founding of our state and our nation. And our association takes, any potential erosion of those rights very seriously. And at the end of the day, control of the land is really the basis for growing anything, including trees. I'm very pleased to hear just from the previous meetings and discussion today as well that the committee doesn't plan to, expand the definition of navigability. That's not something that it sounds like you're looking to do, or further extending the rights of private landowners to the public. Of course, we've all heard and discussed that this would be, the wrong thing to do. But the committee today and throughout the meetings, we've heard a lot about Senate Bill 115 and obviously a lot of conversation now and previously about the public trust doctrine. So I'm going to do my very best to not reiterate too much of what's already been said, but I do want to highlight the points with how it relates to the forestry sector here in the state. We recognize that the legislation, specifically Senate Bill 115, was aimed at a specific issue and likely well-intentioned, but we agree with a lot of what's been said today by certain individuals that the extent of it is much more wide-ranging and impactful than we previously thought. So I'll address kind of 2 things today with regards to Senate Bill 115, again, trying to not recover too much of what's already been said. But number 1, it is our concern and belief that Senate Bill 115, and this is very recently touched on here in this meeting, amounts to a taking of property and has serious implications for private property rights at large. And then number 2, dealing more specifically with Senate Bill 115 being an expansion of the public trust doctrine here in Georgia that will greatly complicate the rights to and the use of water. This is obviously concerning on multiple different levels. It means we've got a situation where we believe that the rights a landowner once had prior to Senate Bill 115, they no longer do have. The bill claims that the state is the trustee of its people's rights to use and enjoy all navigable streams that are capable of the use for fishing, hunting, passage, navigation, commerce, etc., pursuant to the common law public trust doctrine. Basically, we're worried that Senate Bill 115, because this infringes on private property rights based on really an unprecedented application of the public trust doctrine to our navigable waterways in the state. We've heard a lot about its use and application to tidal waters and kind of some historical context there. We're worried about the application of that now, which is very new and unprecedented, as mentioned, to our navigable waterways. The right that a landowner had to their portion of the stream based on long-standing private property rights and our riparian water rights, we believe, as a result of the bill, have been affected. It's really concerning, especially from the perspective of a landowner. I think that's been shown by the sheer number of folks that have been showing up to these meetings here. And the rights a landowner once had to that stream bed, we again are concerned. We believe those have been affected. The title and the rights that come along with that ownership and the certain exclusive rights that that landowner has that is adjacent to that navigable waterway have been affected. The public trust doctrine, kind of speaking more specifically to it, and this is a little bit of reiterating what's been said, but again, kind of tying it to the forestry sector. We believe that it does give certain groups and individuals the ability to bring claims against landowners that infringe on their private property rights. We believe that there's a serious concern when it comes to the permitting side, like we've kind of been discussing here, that I won't really dive back into because it's been discussed a lot. But we also have looked very closely at that case in North Carolina and believe that's a pretty good example of how the expansion of the public trust doctrine to privately owned stream beds presents increased opportunities, specifically for the issue to be leveraged in Georgia courts to develop a precedent that allows certain parties to then leverage public trust doctrine against the state or other private parties in various different ways. I mean, in short, we've kind of seen it used in very troublesome ways in other states. In summary, I'll just kind of wrap it up here. We would, of course, ask that the committee not expand the definition of navigability. Again, we don't believe that's the intention of the committee here today or as a part of this committee, but we also would ask that you provide strong recommendations to address all of these private property rights issues that have been brought up time and time again throughout the meetings. And we're happy to work with y'all on those. And then finally, we would ask that the committee recommend or provide some recommendations for the removal of public trust doctrine from the portion of state law that deals with our navigable waterways. We believe that if we want to address fishing, we can certainly do that, but not in a way that brings into play the public trust doctrine in a way that has never been used before and really opens up to things we may not even be aware of. But I look forward really to more conversation with each and every one of y'all on the committee as y'all look to make recommendations. We at GFA are truly committed to making sure we work towards solution on the fishing side of things, but while maintaining private property rights. And really, again, just want to thank y'all for y'all's time.
Thank you very much, Jake. Any questions for Jake? Appreciate you,
Thank y'all.
Mr. Matthews. All right, we got Representative Laricchia, Department of Agricultural.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First, just wanted to say a special thank you to what each of you do. I have a unique perspective, I guess. I've been on both sides of that table and have an appreciation for what you guys do every day that I hope that the general public is able to appreciate as well. But so most of you know that I've changed roles. I now work as a field operations director statewide for Commissioner Tyler Harper, Department of Agriculture. And the first thing I'd say about this conversation you're having is a lot of the debate throughout history has come out of conversations surrounding agriculture. I know down in my area, and I'm sure up in North Georgia, you still have some old grist mills that were water-powered wheels to grind grains for flour and corn mills, and sometimes they would just dam up the whole creek, and they would divert that water into a concentrated area to turn a wheel to grind the grains and make the flour. Well, those were obviously non-navigable type situations, and then for grazing cattle, where people would use these non-navigable areas to fence it off, keep the cattle in, but also let the water come in for the cattle or the livestock to get water. And so I guess first I would just encourage you on behalf of all of agriculture, and the gentleman mentioned earlier about got to go get on the tractor. Everything we look at is through the lens of agriculture, past, present, and future. Everything we do is to preserve the past, provide for the present, but prepare for the future. What you're about to do and the conversation you'll have will be well into the future on decisions that will be made, particularly in agriculture and the state's #1 industry. And congratulations to all of you for 10 years in a row of Georgia being the #1 state in the nation to do business. Just reached out to Chairman Burchett, wanted to bring a little bit of an issue in front of you that's come to our attention through Commissioner Harper and his staff. Gentleman by the name of Taylor Allen from Louisville. It's Southern Sawmill. Some of you may have remembered, I know that Chair Lady Smith probably remembers the conversation around deadhead logging and pulling these old logs out of these river bottoms that have been there for hundreds of years, dating back to probably even the late 1700s, early 1800s, and they were cutting down in those days right up to the river bank, and some of that was bald cypress. Some of those cypress trees were 400, 500, 600 years old when they cut them down. Real dense lumber, tight rings in it, and unfortunately, they'd cut down those big logs and they would lose them in those rivers with the current and the depth, and those logs have been under the water for hundreds of years. And we had a period of time where there was some legislation that would allow you to be certified and get a permit to deadhead log in our rivers. Well, that sunset and just went away. Well, undoubtedly, the value of some of these logs is to the point now to where a lot of people are trying to get their hands on them literally and get them up off of the bottom of these rivers and these sloughs. And that's where you get in when you go from the river, the run of the river, the channel of the river to the creek that runs in, or the slough, or just a watershed area. That's where you transition from navigable to non-navigable, I guess, in the way that some of it is worded now. Well, the fear is that two fears comes out of this industry of deadhead logging is, number one, we're having some people come up in here from Florida and literally stealing logs, either cutting off a piece of a log that's sticking out of a bank, and they don't care if it's navigable or non-navigable. They'll just pull up there and saw it off, throw it in a boat or hook to it, pull it to a boat ramp and drive off with it. And there's what's called pecky cypress or sinker cypress that has a pecky texture to it, is $100 a board foot today. Very valuable. Y'all remember what happened when copper prices went way up? They were still in the air conditioner right off your house while you're sitting in there watching a football game. And so something similar to that's happening in this sinker cypress, this deadhead logging world. They wanted you guys to make a part of this conversation a recommendation or consideration of reinstituting that permitting process. And obviously be willing to talk about what that fee is and what that would require. But the other one is the ability for someone to enforce the law. Right now, if you catch somebody going down the river with a log, it'd be the equivalent of catching a child stealing a peppermint out of a grocery store. What do you do? The permitting of these deadhead loggers is where you put the teeth in the law to hold people accountable and make sure that this industry is a Georgia industry. Even though it's dead, sunken logs, it is a part of Georgia forestry. And trying to delineate who owns that log is going to be dependent on whether that's navigable or non-navigable. And so that's as short as I could kind of get with that, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, be glad to take a question or two. If not, thank you for what you do.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Representative Jenkins.
How many of these logs are out there? We got any idea how many? What are we talking about here? Is this a big...
that's interesting because we're just now with the technology and the sonar and the live scopes and all the new technology, they are finding more and more logs that would be just under an inch of sediment or silt or whatever. And there's also some concern when you start permitting about how much of that you disturb. Right?
Right.
When you start to hook up to these logs and you hook a come-along to an existing tree on the bank and you pull that log up, I think it would be important for you guys, for the natural resource folks, to know just how much is being disturbed as they pull them up out of there. But there's thousands and thousands. That's the thing they didn't know back then. When they cut that log and they assumed they could float it down the river, a lot of those really dense bald cypress were too heavy and they would just sink because they're full of a lot of water anyway. And so they were losing about 30% of the logs that were going down, 10 to 15% of the cypress and 5 to 10% of the pine would waterlog and it would go to the bottom. So there's a lot of them under there, tens of millions of dollars worth of what they call treasure laying at the bottom of our rivers, and people are coming up out of Florida and just stealing them and going back to Florida with them.
Thank you, Representative. All right. Mr. Reggie Dickey, Georgia Hunting and Fishing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate you members of the committee being here. I'm president of the Georgia Hunting and Fishing Federation. my members actually fish and hunt. I don't have any non-hunting or any other kind of members. They fish and hunt. The reason why a lot of them not here today is because they working so they can fish and hunt Saturday. So we support this bill. A lot that I've heard here this morning, I've heard very little about fishing. I've heard about property rights, and just got a lesson on logging, which I didn't know it had anything to do with fishing. But we support this because the bill actually says we want to keep what we got. We want to keep fishing on navigable waters. And that's what we support. The millions of fishermen in this state who pay for license fees put their money into boat ramps, restocking, and care of our rivers and our streams. And I feel like, and they feel like, if we're spending this money to build boat ramps, or we're spending it to stock these fish, we should be allowed to fish. Nothing in this bill gives anyone the right to trespass. If a fisherman gets out of that river onto the land, he's trespassing. That's already against the law, has always been against the law. The landowner can enforce it. If someone's trespassing on his land, all he's got to do is call law enforcement and get that taken care of. If he doesn't want to call law enforcement, maybe he's got something going on there he wants law enforcement to know about. But what I'm saying is, this bill deals strictly with the fishing. What we've got now, we want to protect. And our organization and our 5,000 members, we support it. Any questions?
Any questions, committee?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Landon Glenn. Landon Glenn. Landon must have had to go. Robert Shockley.
My name's Robert Shockley. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Commissioners and Representatives. I just like to start off by pointing out that y'all, what you already know, y'all have put in a lot of time on this. You and your staffs have put in, I don't know how many hours. You've listened to I don't know how many people. You've demonstrated what it truly means to be a public servant. You've given of yourself, and I appreciate that. And thank you for the time to speak. My point here today to come was in support of House Bill 115. That was the original intent. It's not now. I was going to offer some suggestions and some advice on how I think we could open up more access to the river, and that's coming from someone who has family that owns on the Flint River. But that has changed today. When we first started opening up, I thought that the concerns of the farmers and the Forestry Commission were a little overblown and exaggerated. I was in support of the bill and having fishing rights codified. But after listening to a few experts, that this actually changed things. This isn't something that we just codified what was already here. This actually changed the public trust doctrine on navigable and non-navigable freshwater streams. That is a sea change. That codifies something that we didn't have before. And that basically validated all their concerns and made their concerns mine. I was going to give you some ideas about how to improve access on fresh water. I think we can do that by, copying what we already have for hunting. And that is, we have a mechanism that private landowners can allow hunting for certain species at certain times. We could do the same thing with streams. We could incentivize landowners to give greater access, not just to the stream bank or stream bed, but the stream bank. We could give them protections from liability. We could give them a small stipend, just like we do on hunting properties. Out west, they call it a weehaw, walk-in hunt areas. We could do the same thing here. I think that would improve the experience of people fishing and using the rivers. But we could do that outside of this bill. As someone who came to this meeting in favor of the bill, I think we need to at least, no, I'm sorry, we don't need to shut the door on the public trust doctrine. I think we need to slam the door, lock it, bolt it, and never open it. We've heard that y'all have the right to narrow that doctrine as you see fit, and I think that's great. As the people who are closest to your constituents, you should have that right. Unfortunately, when that door is opened, the next group of legislators and representatives will not be as studious and hardworking as y'all are. We're getting a lot of people from out of state that see this state differently than the way we do. And I think that there are a lot of people with great intentions, and I came here with great intentions, and as the chairwoman said, we know where that leads, and I appreciate that. I used to have that on one of my hats. But I think that door needs to be shut and locked and prevent further generations further down the line from opening that door. I think we can absolutely increase access. And while I'm on that, I firmly believe that we need to increase access on all of our rivers. Because if we don't have people fishing them, floating them, enjoying them, the next generation won't appreciate them. And if we don't have people there appreciating them and taking advantage of them, who's going to even notice when we have pollution on a river? If there's not people there fishing and seeing that we have a fish kill or whatever, if we don't have people there, nobody's going to even notice. But we can do that outside of this law. We can do that without opening the door to the public trust doctrine. Like I said, we can do it individually. We could open up a new system. I see a lot of challenges that y'all are having to face. You know, determining what water is navigable and what isn't. Determining what to do with landowners' rights on land that is navigable where they have a deed and we're taking their control and their access away from it. How do we compensate them? How do we open up those areas that aren't navigable? But I think that can all be done through individual deals with landowners. I think that we can do that by pooling our money together. You know, we have a lot of people who are well-intentioned and engaged and passionate about this. But if we stand up as organizations, whether it be river keepers or whomever, we could pool our money, make sacrifices, and buy the rights to those areas that are in contention. And on that point, I'd like to make, we all make sacrifices. Y'all have all made sacrifices to be here. Landowners make sacrifices every day to buy and keep and maintain their land. If we're going to ask that those sacrifices be nullified because now this section is navigable and you don't have a right that you had before, who's making the sacrifices? Is it the public who just comes here and makes a speech? Did they make any sacrifices to gain access to that? But that landowner made the sacrifices. When I was a kid, we didn't have much. But my mom and dad worked their fingers to their bone so that we could afford land. We always had shoes, but we didn't always have new shoes. We had to get hand-me-downs from my cousin. we had something to eat all the time. But sometimes it was because we found something on the side of the road that was fresh. Those are the kind of sacrifices we had to make to get land and keep it and improve it. And if we're not asking others to make those sacrifices, if we're just wanting them to give it to us, I don't think we deserve it. I'd like to thank y'all again. I appreciate all the hard work y'all have given.
Thank you. All right. Stan Lumsden. So Mr. Stan must have left. Stan Lumsden. Well, folks, with that, we come to the end of our list, and in record time. Is anybody that was on the list that, oh, okay. Well, go ahead, come on. Come on, Mr. Smith. I didn't have you on the list. My apologies.
Well, that's not your fault, and it's one of those magic things involving the computer somehow or other, no doubt. But I had a request, and I do appreciate it, and I echo what everybody that stood here said, thanking y'all for being here, but a step more than that. Thank y'all for this process, for being here as a part of the process and listening to the sides and giving this the time that it warrants, but because it is a hugely large deal with many possible unforeseen consequences, positive and negative, and giving it the time that y'all are giving it and listening to all the testimony that you're listening to makes it almost a certainty that y'all will get the right answer. And candidly, not being flippant, but it's the exact opposite of how Senate Bill 115 was passed. We've spent more time this morning that went into that entire bill. People did not have full information. People had incorrect information. And they acted hastily on that, and now have got something that I think that everybody sees was not nearly as clear-cut and as straightforward a thing as it might have seemed. I appreciate y'all letting me talk, especially since I wasn't on the list, and I'll be quick. I just want to make a couple of thoughts. It would seem to me, well, I got to say one thing real quick. I hadn't planned on talking about Yellow Jacket Shoals, but comments were made with regard to Yellow Jacket Shoals, and that the DNR had historically viewed it as navigable and that sort of thing, and I would respectfully submit I was tangentially involved with the lawsuit that the landowners filed there. And what the evidence was going to be at a hearing that was scheduled for a couple of days before the state and the trial court and the landowner entered into a consent judgment was that Yellow Jacket Shoals is not navigable, that the Army Corps of Engineers had found that it was non-navigable, that the Georgia Environmental Protection Department had found that it was non-navigable, and for years prior to the litigation that we were involved in, the Georgia Department of Natural Resources Rangers, we had evidence, we had their body camera recordings, had on Yellow Jacket Shoals explained to people this is a non-navigable stream. So no, in fact, historically, Yellow Jacket Shoals had been treated as non-navigable, and candidly, it was only after special interest groups got involved and got to talking that all of a sudden, literally in 2022, that changed. So historically, it was non-navigable, and the judgment was so simple. The Attorney General looked at it a couple of days before the hearing and said, well, yeah, the law is crystal clear here. The landowners do control the fishing, and so that's where that is. And the adjacent landowner has filed the same suit because he's in the same situation. So, but once more, that's why this format works. You hear both sides of things. As it relates to the Access Committee and things going forward, one, it would seem to me that you shouldn't
have a new law or change a law, if there's one in place, or if it's going to cause more problems than it clears up. And it seemed to me that there is a law in place, y'all have heard about it, that defines navigability and sets a standard out. And as y'all have heard, and I think the proof's in the pudding, there are millions of people fishing every year, 1,100,000 licenses sold. So there are multiple millions of people going fishing throughout the course of a year, different trips. And from a relative standpoint, there are very, very, very few problems. We aren't hearing every day about people running into problems trying to fish, when you consider that it's millions of events each year. 1.1 million licenses. If those people are fishing twice a year, whatever, millions of events, relatively few problems. So I think the law that's in place does work, number one. And number two, when there have been problems, when there are problems, there is a procedure in place to deal with them. The court system. And it takes these cases on a case-by-case basis, looks at what the facts are, applies what the law is, and comes to a conclusion. And the problem is taken care of. So I would respectfully submit that from a relative standpoint, there isn't this gargantuan problem out there relative to fishing rights. There are millions and millions and millions of fishing trips each year and very few problems, number one. Number two, I believe that it's crystal clear that by changing this law, and now I'm hearing, and I'm certainly glad to hear, that there's no move to change the definition of navigability, because there's zero question on the front end of this process. Our friends with the Georgia Wildlife Federation, who do great things, our friends with the Flint River Keeper, who do great things. It was their stated intent, said in the GON, working on changing definition of navigability is on the agenda. So maybe that's changed now. I hope so. We'll see. But to address that next problem, by changing this, by altering what's in place, there's been some discussion that somehow or another maybe the North Georgia streams could somehow or another be treated different than the middle streams. It could somehow be treated different than the South Georgia streams. And that, from a legal standpoint, that can't happen. I mean, that just can't happen. That violates equal protection. That's a bill of attainder. It can't be done. All non-navigable streams all over the state have got to be treated the same. All navigable streams all over the state have to be treated the same. So this is just, once more, it's not solving a problem, it's creating more problems. But the biggest problem, the absolute biggest problem, and the thing that scares me to death, and I don't say that lightly, I say it from my heart, is this taking issue. Y'all have heard, and this is y'all's fourth go-round, y'all have heard, I'm confident, person after person, because I've heard them today get up here and talk about their love of the land. And Georgia's land, 91% of our land in this state is owned by private property owners. My family owns land. I can say without hesitation, I love my land. And I can't feel confident that the vast majority of landowners feel the same way. And they are Aldo Leopold stewards of the land. And they believe in the land ethic, and they believe in taking care of the property. And they maybe aren't growing 600 pine trees an acre, which would maximize their profit. Maybe they're growing 35 pine trees an acre because it's aesthetically better and it's better for wildlife. But that's private property rights, and private property rights are at the very core of what's right about this state. And people, when they have bought something, and I'll talk specifically about Yellow Jacket Shoals, the people who purchased that land, they looked at it and they found it to be a beautiful place and a good thing, and based on the absolute existing law, they purchased it. And they got a deed and a survey that went to the center of the shoals. They paid the same price per acre of the land out in those shoals as they did on the hill, and they get a tax bill every year for that land out in the shoals, and they have paid taxes on it. And they bought it because they loved it, and they wanted it for their family, and they wanted it for their children, and they wanted it for their friends. Nothing wrong with that. It's a big part of why probably we're all here right now. And here recently, there's a push because others have found that what those folks found to be good and fine, they find it to be good and fine. And they want it. And surprisingly, astonishingly to me, there has been some movement to take those rights from those folks and give them away. And the basis for that we've heard is, well, the state stocks fish, the state protects those fish, the taxpayers built roads, paid for roads to be built, taxpayers paid for boat ramps to be built, and therefore it's only fair that everybody should be able to fish and walk around in there. And what scares me to death, and what ought to scare everybody in this room, is what was referred to a little bit earlier. What happens 3, 4, 5, 6 legislatures down when the argument is being made, well, the state stocked those deer. The state protects those deer. The state built those roads. The state made those curb cuts to give you access to that land. It's only fair that everybody should be able to hunt those deer, should be able to go on that private property. That's the slippery slope that scares me to death, and it's the slippery slope that I'm worried that was getting pushed through, that's not getting pushed through now. People now are paying very, very close attention to this. And I thank y'all for giving me the opportunity to speak, especially when I wasn't even on the list. And I thank you more for being here and doing what you're doing and for taking part in this process that makes our system of government work. Unlike other systems of government that do take from the private property and give, because those systems of government don't work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, thank you very much for your testimony. All right. Is there anybody else, just so I'm sure, that was expecting to speak that didn't make the list? All right. So still, even with Mr. Smith, we have gotten in a record time, 11:30. And I want to thank everybody that testified today. Thanks for your testimony. Thanks for giving your due diligence to this issue, as the committee is trying to do. We've said it 100 times. This issue is a emotional issue and a legal issue, and there are very strong feelings on both sides of the issue. And I appreciate everybody's attentiveness. I'm going to ask the committee, each member, to give some closing remarks, and then we'll adjourn. Chairman Smith?
Well, first of all, I want to thank all of y'all for being here, and I want to thank the people who are not here but are trying to follow this debate. Essentially, I want you to know it doesn't have to end here. The state of Georgia in mid-2000s created something called the Regional Water Planning Districts. All of us throughout the state have the ability to interact on a more local level with how you want to see that part of the state develop, providing you follow our laws. So this is not a removed process. The state has in place a way for any citizen to be engaged and involved in that. And secondly, in a way, this is a good debate to have, because when I first got elected, I lived south of Atlanta. we didn't fish. We didn't want to fall in the water because we'd probably die. So, I mean, we have, as a state, been very good stewards, and we're moving our state along. So, as we debate this issue, I have full confidence in my peers and your input that we will make the right decision. But I think we probably need to leave this meeting knowing that the state of Georgia is a leader nationally in what we've been able to do to give our citizens access to be engaged in these issues. And you do it through your regional water plans. Of course, you can always reach us, and we'll be happy to refer you to a senator if we're not good enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Madam Chairman. She's chair of the Natural Resources Committee, and I have the opportunity to serve on that with her and have learned a lot on there. Georgia, over the past, I guess, 20, 25 years since Governor Miller was in the governor's seat, we've been in the litigation with the water wars with Florida and Florida and Alabama. A special master ruled in our favor. They appealed it. A second special master ruled in our favor. So when we start talking about issues that deal with our waters of the state that actually flow out of this state into another state, I just think we need to be very, very careful. That's all I'll say about that. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to pretend like I am. And then secondly, private property rights. I own just a little bit of property, and I live on the Chattahoochee. And so I'm very cognizant of all the statements being made. But appreciate the opportunity. I tell you, Mr. Chairman, you run a pretty good committee, 4 committee meetings. I had to miss one because of a tax study committee, but the 3 I've been to, we've had excellent testimony. People have been very civil. They've gotten their message across, and we've had some great questions from some of the committee members. So I think this is a good dialogue. It would have probably been even better if we'd have done it before the bill was signed. But anyway, that's just my opinion, So appreciate everybody.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'll echo what my colleagues have said. Thank you for the civility that we've had within this discussion over the, I think this is the 4th meeting that we've had regarding this issue. Very important issue. It pits what I consider family. A lot of the people who spoke from different aspects of farming, conservation, private property, but also the folks who are committed to the tradition of hunting and fishing, that constitutional right that we passed in early 2000s, to come together to discuss this. I will state that as the person who carried Senate Bill 115 at the last minute, and despite what was said up here, the last minute decision to do a settlement caught everyone completely off guard. I walked in sine die and had no clue as to the settlement. Neither did a lot of other people. And with that settlement, I remind you that it was, my understanding is that settlement had a clause in there that would have given a roadmap for everyone on all rivers to follow. That was, I think, what I was told was part of, insisted on a settlement. So the issue was important, because if that lawsuit had stayed, or the settlement had stayed without interaction of the General Assembly, basically all landowners, especially on navigable rivers, which that's the only thing that this bill addressed, it would cut off access across the state. And so that was the rush and the importance of what we did to make sure that at the last minute that the settlement was made public, to come in here and to address the issue. I will tell you, as the person who carried this bill, I'm a personal property rights guy. Don't ever want to go against that. I've told members, even that night, we're not here to expand definition of navigable rivers. Non-navigable rivers aren't even in question if you read the bill. There's been issues about taking and going up streams and tributaries. It's not it. It was simply to make sure that navigable rivers, that there was still public access to navigable rivers. That's it. That's the only thing that bill was trying to address. I have heard some things that concern me that are currently against the law in many of these meetings, and that is trespassing or people not paying attention to what is current law. Even the last gentleman that spoke about the slippery slope of deer stands on people's property. That is against the law. And there's not, I don't think, a member of the hunting community out there that would go and say, we're going to be able to hunt on somebody else's private property without permission. And so there's a lot of things there that I think we need to maybe look at in this, which is to make sure that some of these issues that surround this, or the arguments, is that we are protecting the public property, not only from a point of view of this public trust doctrine question, but also the fact that what is existing law needs to be there, and maybe we even look at it to make sure whether there's more funding, or we're making sure that the existing law is very clear as to what existing law is, not something that was changed or by this bill, but what was law before and what was law after this bill. And I'll just echo, the tradition of what people have done from generations, perhaps 3, 4, even 100, 150 years to access to Georgia's rivers. These are things that we hold dear, and that we were trying to simply address an issue that popped up on literally the last day of session. And I'll give you my word, we're not going to go against private property rights. We're simply trying to address the issue of keeping public access to fishing on these navigable rivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Jenkins?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone that came to testify today. It's been an honor to be part of this process. And just for me, this is basically a search for clarity. The Georgia rivers are more precious as time goes on with the growth of our population and more people wanting to use these resources. That clearly defining where these are is important in our state. I supported SB 115, but this bill, as someone said, it does make it even more important to define where these waters are. So again, just appreciate everyone for participating, and look forward to further discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank you again for setting this up and doing everything you did, and I want to thank Ms. Deb, because I know she did all the work. So I want to make sure that she gets her credit where it's due. I just want to say I've been really impressed throughout this whole process of echoing again the civility of both sides on the issue, because as chairman of Game Fish and Parks, nobody loves hunting more than I do, but at the same time, I love my property just as much as everybody in here too, and nothing gets me more upset than to find another deer stand or somebody on my land, so I completely get that. And I just want to say, as Chairman Knight said, this was thrown together in the waning minutes, and I just want to pledge to you that I promise that we're going to try to come up with something to get this right.
And I want to thank everyone who got up and talked, especially the gentleman that had changed his mind about the Mr. Shockley. I appreciated his honesty about it and the suggestions that he made. I do not agree with Senate Bill 115. I voted against it when it came up, and but the one thing about Senate Bill 115 is that it has forced us to look at this issue and deal with it, and I think out of that, a good thing can come out of that. So hopefully it will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Served on several study committees in my short tenure, and this has been a very well-run
very productive committee so far, but our work is ahead of us. Listening to you has been a pleasure, and we appreciate everybody's participation, not just in this meeting, but in previous meetings. I will say this, I don't have a lot to add that hasn't already been said, except that if you look around this U-shaped table right here, some of us, myself excluded, you've got years and years of experience dealing with issues such as this in the state of Georgia and dealing with them in conservative manners and keeping in mind the shoes you're standing in as well as the seat we sit in. So I want to thank each and every member of this committee and assure everybody out there, everybody here, everybody that may be watching online and participating in this, that this committee hears you, and we're concerned about what's going on, and we'll make the best decision we can given every word of input. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just add my voice to the other members of the committee for thanking everybody for coming out and testify. We know it takes time away from your busy schedule, too, to come this sort of thing, and we appreciate the input. And I appreciate the chairman for running a good committee. I think these have been very productive and informative meetings. To paraphrase Chairman Smith, I do think she's correct that we don't shoot to kill over water rights here in the East, but having heard some of the testimony, I think we do shoot to maim or severely injure at times over it. So I know it's a topic about which we have a great deal of passion, and I think our pledge to you is to try to find a resolution to these issues that's respects both of the traditions that we have, or the tradition of private property ownership and protection of that, and of also the ability of citizens to hunt and fish. They're both constitutionally protected rights. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. All right, so what's next? The intent of the chair is to, we have 4 meetings scheduled for public comment and input, and we are going to schedule another meeting. It's going to be in person, likely at the Capitol, for deliberation and to construct our recommendation, and then after that, we'll submit our recommendation. I don't have a date for you at this point, but I will circulate some dates that will work with the committee, and then we'll get together and see if we can't get this thing in before December 1st. I hope that to be the case, so we're going to have to work the month of November to try and have at least one more meeting, possibility of 2 meetings. Maybe we get a recommendation draft and then let everybody look at it, and then go from there into a final draft for a final meeting. That's the intent going forward. November is a busy month for all of us with family, Thanksgiving and things of that nature, and I'm going to take that into consideration. I'll circulate an email. Again, I want to thank everybody that testified, not just at this meeting, but each and every one of our meetings. We went from a barn to mountain towns, now to South Georgia. And I'd be remiss if I did not mention that Georgia Southern is playing Georgia State tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock or 7:30. So please feel free to come down and watch the Eagles and Georgia State go at it. With that, we'll adjourn here today. And I did want to say this. I said it at every meeting. I want to make sure to say it again. If you did not speak and you want your input to be heard, each and every member of this committee has a card. You feel free to reach out to them, as sometimes getting up and speaking is not, for everyone. So do that. And with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you.